Welcome back to another episode of the HIT Podcast. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where I bring you real-life stories from some of the most interesting and inspirational leaders of our sector. Today, I was delighted to be joined by Hannah Harvey, Chief Operating Officer at Saffron Housing. We talk at length about Hannah's journey through leadership, some of the things she's done to create a work-life balance. We talk about diversity and inclusion and Hannah's recent bid to become president of the CIH. I hope you enjoy the episode, and if you do, I'd ask that you like and subscribe. Enjoy the show. Hannah, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, James. Good to be here. Exciting.
I know, yeah, definitely. It sounds like you've been up to a lot recently, but we'll get into that. As I always like to start, could you just give us a bit of an introduction to yourself, just who you are, what you do, and just to give the listeners a bit of an overview of yourself?
So my name's Hannah Harvey. I am currently the Chief Operating Officer at Saffron Housing Trust, which is a rural community housing provision, Norfolk and Suffolk, a little bit of Cambridge, a little bit of Essex, actually. It's got about 6,500 units. So I've been there for about 3.5 years. And I basically look after all of the operational arm of Saffron. So that is everything from customer service to transformation through to our repairs service. So it's a very varied role, quite busy.
Yeah, sounds it. And it sounds like you've been up to quite a lot recently, but talk us through, because I know you've been in the sector. Is it 12 years? Kind of what got you into the sector? What was the appeal and what do you love about it, I suppose?
So I'm going to really avoid talking about how I fell into housing, because that is actually one of my pet peeves when people talk about falling into housing.
Everyone says it.
I think we do. I know. I think we do know. It's not a criticism of anybody, because I do know that people don't understand it. It's not a career of choice, and I think that's probably something we have to look at. But I genuinely, I didn't choose housing as a career. Actually, I started my life as a serving police officer. I was a frontline police officer. Yeah. Then I was a detective sergeant for a little while, working in MIT and what was public protection, so the sex offender unit.
Right.
And then I'll be honest, after about 8 years, I suffered a bit of burnout, and I was still quite young. I joined at 18, so I was quite very young police officer and was on accelerated promotion, things like that, to be honest. And sort of really started to burn out and had to really consider my life options, I think it's fair to say, about actually looking after myself.
Yeah.
So approached what was the Police Federation and my union and just said, look, I want to take a career break. So took a career break of 5 years and thought I'd go into the much easier world of children's services. God knows why I thought that'd be easier, but that's where I ended up in children's services, working the youth offending team. Because what I wanted to do was try and stop people getting to prison. Does that make sense? I've dealt with putting people there, and then I dealt with people once they come out the other side, which is what you do on post-convicted sex offenders. And I thought going to prison, to be perfectly honest, I'd like to change that kind of part of it, and did that for a few years. And whilst I was doing that, housing was becoming something I was seeing more and more so interlinked with offending, to be perfectly honest. I was seeing an awful lot of my younger people, the fact that our housing wasn't stable was really impacting on their ability to stay out of prison. And actually, if I'm honest, some people chose to go to prison because it meant they had somewhere to live.
Yeah, of course.
And that, and you talk about 15, 16, 17-year-old children at this point in my life. So I thought that, there must be something more we can do. And if I'm honest, an opportunity came up to work as an ASB coordinator, which was part funded by a really good housing association called Victory Housing Trust, and part funded by actually District Council, Norfolk District Council. And I spoke to my boss, and I basically got seconded out, but ended up leaving and going into that profession full time, essentially. So started as an ASB coordinator, but then quickly realised I didn't want to just do that. I wanted to do more generic housing. So when a permanent position came up at Victory, I took that. Yep. And then from there, kind of then had this kind of rise through the housing system, really. So have done it all. Had done ASB, had done generic housing officer, became a team leader. Then, to be fair, quite rapidly, I think, at points. But yeah, I've definitely seen it all. But that's how I ended up here.
Right. And you have had a rapid rise. Talk me through that, because people are so interested in this and think that the progression can't be quick in housing and it has to be slow. Why do you think it has been a rapid rise? What have you done to put yourself out there to get yourself to the level you've got to today?
I think it's a few things. I think you have to be really brave as an individual and accept that there'll be times when it doesn't go the way you want it to. So you're going to face knockbacks. And I think that's okay, actually. And this sounds a bit cliche and a bit cheesy, but that's what you learn from that. I think also it's about understanding your strengths and what you're really good at, And I think the most important thing is just being true to yourself. I think authenticity, and it's a word that's banded around again, and it's a bit of a fashionable word, I think. But it is really, really true. It's really important, because if you stay true to who you are, then when you go into an organisation, there's no hidden agenda, so people trust you, and trust is a massive part of our sector, and it's a part of any sector I would like to take, but I think in our sector it's really important because you're dealing with vulnerable people quite often. So I think it's also really important to pick the right organisation for you, and for them to pick the right organisation for them as well. So
of course,
I think that actually I've always put more importance on my values being aligned to the organisation than anything else. And I've worked with an organisation where I had fantastic opportunity, fantastic organisation actually, but actually from a values perspective I really struggled. So actually what gave me a massive opportunity, and it absolutely gave me a lift up, it actually taught me what I really wanted to be and what I really didn't want to be. And that gave me a really good solid platform. So I really think there's something about making sure your values match the organisations that you're in. There is a big thing about you've got to be brave and understand you're not always going to get the job, but it doesn't matter because it's about the experience. And that, I've gone for jobs I haven't got, but actually I'm really grateful that I went through that process, because you learn an awful lot about yourself, and you also learn an awful lot about what you don't want to be. And I think that's incredibly important for people. So I think that, and also if I'm, there can be an element of right place, right time too, if I'm perfectly honest. Of course there's that to it as well, but I think if I was to give anybody advice, just be true to who you are and do not change that offer. Don't bend yourself to fit what you think people need, because it will never ever ever turn out well for you, because eventually who you really are will come to the fore, and that's not it's not a comfortable position for anybody to be in.
How do you yourself as a leader now, how do you promote people that work for you and work around you to be authentic? Because it's brave, right? And I think our sector is great at this, but I also think it's difficult sometimes to be yourself, because there's a narrative out there that you have to be a certain type of person to be a leader. You can't be vulnerable. You've got to be tough and strong and resilient, and all these words come up, but vulnerability is key, I think, to leadership.
I think it's really important. I think there is nothing wrong with people seeing that in you. Actually, I think it's really, really powerful that people see that you're human. And I think that I would like, and no, I am quite confident. You could talk to any of my current reports, anybody that's worked for me before, actually, they would all say I'm incredibly human and real. And there are times when I have a bad day and I'm like, I'm having a really bad day. I'm really sorry. This isn't working for me today. Can we do it another day? Or no, they've seen me get upset about things when it's not going right. They've seen me be really happy when things are going well. I remember through the pandemic, I shared a blog because I had to isolate initially because one of my sons has a disability, so his class is clinically extremely vulnerable. So for the first few months, we had to completely shut down. We couldn't go out, and I found that really difficult because I'm quite a sociable person and I like to run and I like to get out. My whole family are outdoorsy. We're all active. My kids play football, rugby. We're an active family, and I found it really difficult. So I wrote a blog for my organisation talking about actually how hard it was, and actually I'm really struggling, and I really hope if any of you are struggling, can reach out and talk to me. And honestly, James, I have never had so much positive response. And it was just because all of a sudden, this person who was technically a lot of people's boss, I hate that word because I don't like hierarchy, was just somebody that wasn't robotic and actually was very true. And they could really relate to some of the things that I was sharing with them. And actually, I openly said, like, this is pretty shitty, to be honest. This is horrible, and I can't manage it. And I just think that that's so important. And if you model that as a leader, then people feel much more comfortable doing it themselves. I think the days of God, look, there's always going to be a place where you have to be very corporate and very polished and very political. And I'm not saying that's not right, because there are, if I'm talking to Barclays around finance, I'm not going to talk about things being shitty, am I? You're not going to do it.
No. Yeah.
But when you're talking to your team or you're talking to your organisation, that authenticity is so important, because actually, if people believe in you as a person, they are far more likely to believe in your vision and what you want to deliver, because they understand it's coming from a place of realism. It's not made up. It's not something you've plucked out of the air from some corporate Google plan that you've seen. You feel and you believe. And if people see that, then they want to do it. So I really think it's about, if you model it, people will follow.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's how I do it, I think. I don't know about other people, but that's how I've done it.
No, I think that's absolutely spot on, and it's similar for myself. And then on the other side of that, because you talked about lockdown and stuff, and I was going to ask you later on, but you mentioned running. How do you promote a healthy or healthy mindset with your team and stuff to make sure that they're looking after themselves? Because I think that's become a much more relevant thing now after COVID, which is ridiculous, but it just is the way it is. But people have started to think about health and well-being much more now. How do you promote that within your teams? Because you're a runner. How do you get people to...
So I think I'm a runner, but not everyone likes to run. My other half hates running. She's like, why would you do that? Well, it's just rank. But I do use it, and I honestly, I need it in my life because it's what gives me my time and space. I've got a wife, I've got 4 kids, I've got a full life. I'm busy. I'm a COO. I'm on the CIH board. I'm part of the Wish board, although my tenure finished in September. But there's lots of stuff that's going on for me, so I have to run to give myself space, and actually also gives me time to think a bit creatively for my actual job as well. It gives me that time away from the grind of that kind of, I call it the leadership treadmill, where you just keep bloody running and nothing's happening because you've not stepped off. So I actually put it in my calendar, in my diary.
Do you?
So in my work diary, you will see, if I was to share my screen with you, that actually there are blocks where I put running for an hour. I've just recently done Edinburgh Marathon, actually, and I always used to do my long run on a Friday because I really struggle on the weekends to long run because I want to spend time with my kids. So I would sometimes on a Friday be gone for 3.5 hours. And I just put it in my diary. That's what I was doing. Amazing. So I think when people see that you are doing it, they're much more likely to do it again. And I also say to people, like, it suits me. And I have to say, actually, to be fair to Saffron, we very much promoted that before the pandemic. So it's something that I've kind of been used to doing for a while. And I have to say, I've worked with other organisations. Flagship did it when I worked at Flagship, and so did what was Hanover, but is now Anchor. And when I worked there, they did it too. So I'm quite lucky to have worked in organisations that really understand the importance of health and well-being. I think you have to model that behaviour for people to understand it's okay to do it. It's okay to not feel bad about it. So a working day for me is, it's the holidays at the minute, so it's all over the shop for me at the moment. I've got kids going to places all over stuff. So I start work. I normally start work at about 7:30, and then I'll probably work to about 9:30, and then I have an hour off. And I'll do bits and pieces with my children if they're here. I'll then start again for another few hours, and I'll probably have lunch with them if they're here. And then I'll do some more work in the afternoon, and then I might not do any more work till about 7:00 at night, and then I'll work 7 till about 9 because it suits me. And actually my brain works much better later in the evening. So my working day is very much around what fits in with my life. I don't make my life fit my job. And I think the sector's actually very good at that, James. I think we're very good at it. I think we need to promote it a little bit more. So I actually think it's a real unique selling point of our sector, that people can come in and work in that way. And also, there's no pressure. My team knows if I email them at 9:00 at night, there's no expectation that they respond to me because I know they're not doing it. It's just that actually that's how I work, and that's easier for me. And I'm quite lucky. My CEO actually is quite similar to me. He has quite a similar kind of working. He's a bit more active at night as well. So we tend to communicate a bit outside of that. But again, he wouldn't expect it of me if I didn't want to do it, because actually that's he accepts that's how he chooses to work. So I think it's about accommodating people like that. But running for me is an absolute must. And I've got some people that do like kayaking, all sorts of things. We're lucky we're in Norfolk, we're surrounded by water, and it's a beautiful place to live. But if your way to relax is to sit in your front room and read a book, fine. I don't, take the time, make sure you look after yourself, because we need to, the days of being 9 to 5 driven around KPIs are gone. It's about output.
Yeah, it is.
Actually, I don't mind where the output comes or how it comes. I just want it to be done. So I don't see the need for that to be prescriptive. And actually, if you prescribe it, you're far less likely to get what you need out of it.
Agree, totally. And I think you mentioned a few things there, which I'm interested in. So you sound like one of the busiest people I've ever spoken to. So, and one thing that I get a lot from people going for roles, and we've got some stats to back this up actually, that women are less likely to put themselves forward for roles than men, i.e. because of the pressures of life, etc. And that's generally because they always say to me, listen, I've got a family of 3 children. I haven't got the time to pursue a career and a home life. What tips and tricks would you give in terms of being able to manage all of those things without having that mum guilt in one side, that work guilt on the other side of that coin?
So I think one of the first tips I can give you is to accept that you're going to have parent guilt. So mum or dad, because obviously you could be a single dad and have the same issues that you would have as a single mum. And I think you have to accept you're going to feel that. I still feel it. I've got 4 children and I can't split myself in 4 ways. I've got a very demanding 17-year-old teenager at the moment, as you can imagine, and an equally demanding 5-year-old, but in different ways, obviously. So I think you have to accept, you have to a degree accept there's going to be a bit of parent guilt. And I think once I did that, I actually found it a little bit easier to live with.
Yeah.
I am super organized. So I literally do live by a calendar and a diary. So I even have a planner downstairs which says where I am, what I'm doing, and also what my children are doing.
Yeah.
And I know not everyone can do that, but that's just what works for me. I found what works for me, and that's what works for me. I am really fortunate to have an incredibly supportive wife.
Yeah.
Who really, really has stood beside me and alongside me and has enabled me to do some things I do. However, she's currently a full-time student at uni, so it works both ways. We do that for each other, and we figure out how we can make it work. I think a big thing is finding the right organisation, James. So I know I am lucky because I have a really supportive wife that can help me do it. I know that isn't always the case with what if you're a single parent or your other partner is having to work at 100 miles per hour as well. But I think where you can get some of that is finding the right organisation. So there are some fantastic organisations in this sector that really want to promote talent and will help you and enable you to do it irrelevant of what your life circumstances are at home. And I know we do it. I've got people that work in condensed 4-day weeks, work over a 9-day fortnight, do flexible hours. Like we really try to encourage people to work, like I said, to your job enables you to live. It shouldn't be the other way around. And actually that's how we've managed it. I think as well, you have to be really kind to yourself and understand it's hard. And actually there's going to be days where it feels like you want to get off and you can't do it. And that's okay. And on those days, I probably run for 2 hours instead of 40 minutes.
Yep.
And that's okay too. So I think those would be my tips. I think as well, you have to really know what it is that you want to achieve. So I always had a really clear objective. Now, I will be honest, my objective wasn't to climb a tree.
Yeah.
My objective was genuinely to make a difference. And that's what I always wanted to do. It just so happened that it's turned out for me the way that I felt that I can make a difference in the easiest way for me is to actually go up a ladder. But that isn't the case for everybody, and it doesn't need to be the case. So I think that once you know what you want to do, figure out how you can do it and find the right organisation to enable you to do it, because you could have an amazing organisation, but it doesn't mean to say it's the right one for you. So find your right fit and do it that way, and just be kind to yourself and understand some days it's going to be, some days I honestly, at the end of my day, I think, dear God, how am I going to get through the next one? And other days I love it and I breeze through it, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's acceptance, I think, James.
And how do you make sure that it's not the running that always gets taken? The time for your running always is the one that gets, because everyone says, okay, balance the family, balance the work, but my me time always disappears. It's always the one that goes. I know you said put it in your calendar, but
I'm
it's
quite
so
militant
important
about it. I'm honestly quite militant about it, and it is something that I have got very good at protecting that time. That time to me is precious, and even and my other half knows that as well, and my children actually. So I am very busy. I do an awful lot, and I like it that way. I like to be busy. It's just who I am. I've got an immense amount of energy, and actually it suits my personality to work in that way. I am really, really protective of that time and relevant it being in a diary. So it's like a non-negotiable for me. So it might mean that some days I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to do it, but actually it sets me up for the day. I quite like that feeling of having that kind of endorphins rustling through my body as I sit down to work. There's other times, like last night I went running at 8 o'clock at night because it was too hot to go early in the day.
It was too hot.
So that for me, I'm not really prepared to let it drop, and actually I would let something else drop over that. The only thing I wouldn't let drop would be my family time, to be honest, but I would let a work capacity drop. And I think actually that's about understanding, is it critical? If I don't do it right now, what is the worst that could happen? And having worked in a police service where the worst that could happen is someone could die, and whilst there are obviously always situations where that could possibly happen in your housing too, I always look and think, right, what is the worst that could happen if I put that off by an hour? If I say to somebody, do you know what, actually I can't meet at 1 o'clock, I need to meet you at 2, what's the worst that's going to happen? And nothing. That person might be a bit irritated, and if that's the case, they'll be like, well, actually fine, I'll meet you at 1, but I'm going to change an appointment later in the day. I think it's just about asking yourself that question. And understanding actually you have no value to anybody if you're not looking after yourself personally. You will be none, because if you're not looking after yourself, you're not going to be firing on all cylinders, so you won't perform.
Yeah, and I meet so many people that said, "Oh, I wish I would have gone for that opportunity, or I wish I would have done this." And I think it's great to get an insight from someone that's been there, done it, and managed to balance the three things.
The best piece of advice I ever got given is, and you touched on it earlier actually, about females going for roles. It's the role I've got now currently, and I was at what was then Hanover, but we were then merging, and I had been fortunate. I secured a director's role in the new organisation, so I was fine. I had a job to go to, but it would have been based out of Bradford, and I lived in Norfolk, and all that was fine because it was travelling. It would have been nothing particularly different. I was coming towards the end of my time of wanting to do it. And this job at Saffron came up, and I looked at it, and I had a really good relationship with my line manager, who was a male actually, who was fantastic. Mark Blake, his name was incredible. And I looked at him and I was like, I don't look at this job. It's right on my doorstep. It's incredible. I know I could do this job, but I don't hit these criteria. And he laughed at me. He laughed. He's like, that's the difference between you and me. And I said, I don't understand. And he said, I look at that and think, no, I could do that. He said, I don't see the bits I can't see. He said, but all you focus on the bits that you can't do. And that's an actual real male to female trait. There is a lot of science around that. And he said to me, what have you got to lose? He said, you're in a very lucky position. I was well thought of at Hanover. I had a job. He said, what have you got to lose to try? Just give it a go. And obviously I'm so glad he told me to do it, because he was right. He was right. I can do it, and I could evidence that I could do it. And actually the bits that I couldn't do, I was very honest and said, actually, I've not done that before, but I can learn. And if you give me the opportunity, I'll show you. And I think that's very compelling as well when you go for an interview. If you say to somebody, look, I can't do that bit, but actually teach me, it's an honesty that people like.
I agree.
I'm never going to go for an FD post, am I? Because I'm not a finance director.
No, of course.
But I am going to go for, my obviously next move would probably be a CEO position somewhere. Well, I've never looked after, for example, I've never looked after finance. I understand it, but I've not looked after it. I'm going to have to know people how I do it. So I think it's about being a bit brave again, but that was the best piece. And that was actually a man that gave me that piece of advice. It was a fantastic piece of advice,
well, and the other thing is, everyone that goes into their first chief exec role can't possibly say that they've done everything within that role. They can't.
And who would, because I tell you what, that person doesn't exist. That person does not exist. No. My CEO I currently got, he's fantastic. My CEO is amazing. James Farnston's name, he's incredible. He was a finance director before he became a CEO, and he would openly admit to you, he hasn't got a bloody clue about operations. He's never done it. But actually, as a CEO, well, you've got people around you that understand it, and he's learned really quickly. And what is actually really helpful about that for me is that because he hasn't done it, he asks me a question that I would just not think to ask myself anymore, because he just sees it different. He's got a different lens, hasn't he? So the question he asked me, I'm thinking, well, actually, I hadn't thought about that. That's a step that I've missed. And actually, it's really important that you have that kind of push with each other.
Of course, and it's complementary teams as well, right? So what you have as a skill set, he doesn't, and vice versa. So it's all good. I've obviously been following you on LinkedIn for a while, and I'm seeing that you're campaigning at the moment for vice president position at CIA. Talk me through it. Kind of, what's the process like? What's the ambition for you? And if you did get the role, what would be the things that you'd love to implement and be more vocal in our sector about?
So the process is you put application in, and I think it's fair to say that people talk to you about, have you ever considered doing it? And I'll be honest, I've always wanted to do it. I have always wanted to do it, but I'd always wanted to do it perhaps a little bit later. But now seemed like the right time to try. So I put myself forward like that, and thankfully was chosen, which is an incredible honour, to be perfectly honest, to be even considered to be one of the people that puts themselves forward. And then obviously there's 3 candidates this year. There's myself, Jill Haley, and Michael Ash, which I'm in very distinguished company, I think it's fair to say. Very, very respected, long-serving members of the housing sector. So a little bit daunting, actually, for somebody like me who is relatively new to the sector still. Whereas when you say 10 years is new, but I think in the capacity of what other people see, people spend years in housing. So was really fortunate at this age, thought that I could do it. So they put me through. And then we're obviously now in that process of asking for people's votes, which has been an interestingly exhausting but very exciting deal for me. So it's made me channel my inner ability to make little vlogs, which I've never done before, but I've been quite enjoying doing them, actually.
I've been watching them, they're great.
Brilliant. Yeah, they're great. So that's been good. I think it's made me really I've always had quite a good understanding of what's going on nationally because of national roles that I've held. So it's really made me understand the different issues that each part of the country has got. Wales as well, actually Scotland, Northern Ireland, because that's part of the whole CIH band. It isn't just England. So really understanding the complex needs of all of the different parts of our country, and obviously the individual countries like Wales, individual issues, Scotland's individual issues, and Northern Ireland as well. So they're all different. We've all got different things that we're fighting. I think for me, the vice presidency, and then obviously because you become the president the year after, it is absolutely an ambassadorial role. It's, you know, you can't change massive things around infrastructure and things, but what you can do and what it does provide you the opportunity to do is really give a platform to things that you feel really strongly about. And actually it also gives you a platform to talk about what the membership feel really strongly about, members right across the country, and all of those will have a particular view or feeling about something that they are passionately about, they feel passionately about. And as the vice president and president, it's my job to make sure that those views are heard, and they are heard by the CIH itself, but also by MPs, councillors, health systems, local authorities, police services. And I think that's what the vice presidential and presidential ambassador gives you. I also think, if I'm honest, it's an incredibly massive honour to think that people believe that you're the right person to be that ambassador for our membership body. And I mean, I'm a huge advocate of CIH and always have been. I think that's why I'm chartered. It was really important for me to become chartered, because I think the value that it offers as a sector is second to none, absolutely second to none. And I really want to give back something. So I think there's that part to it. Like, actually, I want to pay that back. I think for me, as you can probably tell, and people tend to know, I feel incredibly passionate about inequality and EDI issues. And I actually think that as a sector, whilst we're going great guns, actually, I think, to really change things, I think we are perhaps a little bit naive to how much we need to change and how systemic some of the issues are that we have within our sector, but also the tenants that we represent and work. You know, we're fortunate enough to work alongside these groups of individuals, and I think that that's a massive part of why I want to be the vice president and then the president, so I can really keep that stuff at the fore. Lara, who's the current VP but will be the president next year, she's got a real momentum going around equality issues, and is going to be doing some fantastic work around and making sure that the boards are representative of everybody within our communities, particularly BAME, because we're so underrepresented at board level, actually at any level in organisation, but particularly on boards. I mean, I'm on an all-white board. It's not particularly helpful, and it's obviously not representative of the country that we live in, to be perfectly honest. So I really want to pick up the mantle from where she's left off and carry it on. I have faced massive prejudice and inequality my whole life, and continue to do so in what is perceived to be a very modern world, and I would suggest that it absolutely isn't. And I face massive inequalities on frequently, well, probably a daily basis still, quite honestly. So I think for me that sits at the core of whatever I do, should I be lucky enough to be voted in. And even if I wasn't, I wouldn't stop talking about it.
I think on that point, because it really does mean a lot to me, this is, if you remember back to the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm picking one particular thing here, there was a real, we need a strategy for this, and we need to do this, and we're going to start to recruit more BAME talent into our organisation, right? And I feel, and I'm not saying we're not trying, but I feel like the messaging's got lost in the last 12 months now, and it's been replaced with a different messaging. And my worry is that we sometimes put a spotlight on one thing, and then we do something about it, and then we stop. But it shouldn't be stopped.
I don't think we understand that it's a constantly iterative process. So I have this. So Black Lives Matter movement is a very good example of that. Another good example is currently the female, obviously, football team has just won the European Cup. Now, what that has done is shine a massive spotlight of inequality, gender inequality, actually, not just in sport, but gender inequality across society. Now, what will happen in the next few months is people get behind it, because there's that passion and momentum, like with the Black Lives Matter movement, which frankly was out of the most horrendous atrocity I think anybody could have seen or witnessed. So people get behind it because there's that fuel, there's that passion, there's that fire for people to really make a difference. And then over time, as that passion starts to wane, we don't continue with it. We stop shining the spotlight, like you've said. And what happens is it's still there in the background, and we're still doing things. We're still doing little bits and pieces, but we're not completely still pushing the agenda, because all of a sudden something else, some other travesty, frankly, happens, and that sits alongside it. And it's like, I mean, I love the fact that we celebrate Pride Month. I think it's fantastic. But you know, the month it's amazing. However, why do we have it just for a month? I don't get it. Like, I'm not a lesbian for a month. My whole life. Like, I don't just think just for that month of June and July, whatever, you know, in Norfolk it tends to be July because that's when Norwich Pride is, but you know, in actual world it's June. I'm not just gay for June, am I? No. I'm gay my whole life. So actually, why do we highlight it for 1 month? And it's the same with, you know, Black History Month. Why are we just talking about it for a month? We should be talking about it all of the time. We should, yes, shine the spotlight on a particular moment in time, but use that moment in time and just talk about it. Keep it in the everyday narrative, because what happens is it falls out of people's conscious. So yes, of course they stand behind it and want to make a difference. But if it's not constantly being drip fed into our conscience via social media, podcasts, news, push the background, because other life issues take over. Cost of living, for example. Of course. They take over. So I think it's about us putting it at the forefront all the time. And honestly, genuinely, if I was to become the vice president, which I would imagine the election will be over by the time this podcast goes out, it would be the thing that I'd put at the front of my agenda, because I just think it's about keeping it in people's conscience, keeping people talking about it. There are more than, you know, there are many, many protected characteristics. I've got some of the disability. That's a protected characteristic. You know, there's multiple protected characteristics. We need to talk about all of them and keep them at the forefront. And I really love what Lara's going to do. I think it's going to be fantastic. And she is absolutely a force that will hold the sector to account. And if she holds this sector to account, other public sectors will follow, because they're going to have to. Of
course they will. It's like net zero carbon. I was speaking to someone about this the other day, and it's kind of like we put the agenda out, then we sort of do the behavioural change, and all of a sudden everyone's thinking about plastics and net zero and energy and all these things, right? But I felt like we had that momentum with the Black Lives Matters movement to start with, and everyone started doing the talent strategies, and some people have done really well with it. I think it's more systemic around behavioural change within organisations, because before I went through that process, I had to look at my own unconscious biases, wherever they might be. And it's crazy when you look at it and think, actually, do you know what? Just some of the things I was doing had bias in it. And that's a world thing.
I think that's right. I think everybody has unconscious bias, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. We all have them. Every single person has an unconscious bias. It's about understanding it, acknowledging it, and learning how to deal with it. I think it's what I always say to people, like, nobody is ever going to get upset if you ask somebody a question because you want to know how to handle a situation better. I am never going to get upset if someone says to me, so are you and your partner both called Mum? Like, it doesn't upset me. I would rather say, yeah, actually we are. Now, what would upset me is if people talk about it behind my back, or whisper and I'm not sure, because they're too afraid to ask the question. You know, I like to think I'm really approachable, and I would much rather someone say to me, can you just talk me through that? Because then actually people are wanting to learn. We shouldn't be afraid to ask a question. You know, Lara is never going to be afraid if someone says to Lara, what do you think? Can you tell me what you think, how I can make it better? It is much better to ask the question than shy away from it. I think sometimes we are paralysed by our own fear of doing something wrong. And I think actually, if you can, going back to being a bit brave.
I was going to just say, the bravery comes up straight away.
It's a brave thing again. Actually, if you're not afraid to ask the question, I cannot possibly understand what it feels like to be a Black female going into an organisation, but I can ask. And actually, what can I do to make that a better experience for you? What is it that we are doing that is making it difficult? Can you tell, how can I help you? Any more than someone asking me a similar question, like, no, you're not going to know what it feels like to be a gay female walking into an organisation, because you're not one. So actually, you just need to ask the question. So open up the conversation, open up the debate. And actually, if you open up the debate, what you'll find is that honesty that I talk about will come out. And actually, as an organisation, if you are listening to what people are telling you, you will make it a much better place for people to be. And if we all start doing that, surely then just actually it's a community, as a society, as a sector, life will become much easier for everybody, because there's no fear. People shouldn't be afraid. You shouldn't be afraid to ask the question, and you most definitely shouldn't be afraid to be who you are. And I think that's a change. That's a change we've got to make, about encouraging that curiosity, to make sure that we actually make sure that everybody feels included and inclusive.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've been blessed because my brother's gay, and I've seen the prejudice that he's had all of his life and the career path. And I think I see that from an education, but like you say, I think if I'm a black female going into it, I can't live that experience. I don't understand it enough. What I would say though is I think social media's got a big part to play. It can be a really, really good tool, but it can be terrible because I used to put some blogs out there and posts out there and get torn down because use the wrong language or use the wrong word. And you think, well, I'm trying to change the industry and I'm trying to fix some things and trying to help to fix things. And people are nitpicking on wrong word or wrong statement. And that's when people stop being brave, is when they feel like they're trying to create a change and actually getting teared down for it.
You can, and I think, if someone was to ask me how I describe my sexuality, I would describe myself as a gay female. Mm-hmm. Now, my best friend would describe herself as a lesbian. Now, that's because she prefers that word, and I prefer gay female. Now, that's just because I prefer that terminology, because that's one that I feel more comfortable with. Some of my friends would describe themselves as queer. I've got non-binary people in my life. There's lots of people in my life that would give themselves a different label, because actually that's just what it is that they feel comfortable with. But I just think, I've just said the word label because that's how we make people feel. We make people feel like they've got to label themselves, and actually you haven't. You've just got to be you. And I cannot wait for the day. I think we, as a world, as a society, I think we'll have made it when people don't feel like they have to justify themselves. Yeah. So the minute I walk into an environment and I don't have to a degree, out myself. Or my daughter gives a very good example. She started sixth form, so she's just finished her first year at sixth form. And we were talking about, I can't remember what we were talking about. I think we might have actually been talking about Black Lives Matters and kind of the interconnectivity between protected characteristics and things like that. Yeah. She's quite a political 17-year-old, which is fun. Mm-hmm. She said to me, Mum, she said, I feel like I have to come out at sixth form. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I have to tell people I've got two mums so that when they come around for tea, they won't be shocked to see that I haven't got a dad here, or there's just not one of you. And I thought, how sad is it that actually even my daughter feels like she has to justify her family? And I think that we need to really look at ourselves if we are still putting people, she's 17, in a situation where they feel like they have to say something to justify an existence. We should just see people. We shouldn't see anything else. You should just see a human. Agreed. It is a human, and because even if you're employing somebody to do a job, all you should see is a human, and if they've got the skill set that they need to deliver for you as an organisation, and actually if you've got the skill set as an organisation to make sure you can deliver for them. Once we get to that point, then we've done it, but we are way off there. We are nowhere near it.
Yeah, I think the reason for that is that we think we've done enough. But we haven't done enough until it's actually not a thing. It's not even a label. It's just we're all the same. Exactly.
I don't. I have a really good relationship with Lara, and I have a really good relationship with James. James is my CEO. James is a white male. Lara is a black female. I don't see anything other than James and Lara. That's all I see, because actually I talk to them because they're people, and I am sure when they talk to me, they don't look at me and think, oh, that's the gay one. They just see Hannah, who delivers something, and that's how we need to get ourselves. And I don't believe people do that. Actually, I think our sector is very good at not doing that. But I think what we need to do is actually, it needs to just not even be something we have to talk about anymore. We shouldn't need to talk about it.
Agreed.
It should just be, it is how it is. And look at that person. Haven't they got an amazing skill set? God, aren't they really talented? Look what they can do for us. God, what can we do for them? Once you get to that point, it will be 100 times better for everyone, a million times better, actually. And I just think we're nowhere near it, but we are trying. And I have to say, it is the one thing I am proud of in housing. We really are trying.
100%.
We acknowledge our failures, and actually we're doing the very best we can to try and put it right.
Yeah, I agree. But I still think there's a million miles to go. But that's going to be a behavioural change over many years and decades, which is a shame, but it's going to take time for us to get there, unfortunately. The one thing that we said we wanted to pick up on is the cost of living crisis that we're currently experiencing. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on where do you think we are with that, and how are we going to try and solve some of it? I mean, I appreciate that some of it's out of our hands a little bit, but what's your view and what's your take on what's going on at the moment with that?
So I think it's a challenge that nobody in a generation has seen. No. I've most definitely never seen it, and I've never experienced it professionally. I think we have to understand that it's a challenge that is going to be faced by everybody. So our tenants are going to experience it, but we're also going to experience it and live it. And that's really important as well, that we can't separate ourselves from that. Cost of living is going to impact upon everybody, and is impacting upon everybody. Obviously, it's not, it's tenants, it's team members, all of us are having some kind of very valid experience based around cost of living. I think we have to acknowledge that some people are more affected than others, and unfortunately it tends to be those people that are in lower socio kind of economic areas of the country, places like Bradford, places like that. We also have to accept that actually there's an interesting article that CIH shared recently around the cost of living. It's fascinating. We recommend that you read it. BAME households are disproportionately affected. I think it said in there something like white households will, there'll be an increase of something like £2,000 a year on household income, but for BAME, that's £2,900. I don't know why. Does anybody know why? Why is it happening? Why are they more disproportionately affected? There's also something in there about gender balance as well, gender inequality around it. Right. What difference does it make? Surely everyone should just be impacted upon the same. It comes back to my point about equality and everybody just being the same. So there's that. I think we have to really consider, and actually, what are we doing to make sure that if people are disproportionately impacted upon, how are we supporting the particular parts of our community that are disproportionately impacted upon? What are we doing? I think that's much bigger than just housing. I think that's actually a country issue. I think obviously it's something that's very much being talked about at the moment in the current Conservative race, obviously for next PM. I think that we have some organisational responsibilities to really understand our tenants, and that comes back to having the right data within your organisations to make sure you understand your tenants, to make sure you can support them in the right way. I think we're all going to have to make some really difficult decisions about what is essentially an essential service to support our tenants. And actually, the difference between being a social provider and being a private landlord is that we have a social and moral obligation to support and look after people within our homes. We're not just providing bricks and mortar. Of course, our first and foremost is to provide somebody a safe, warm, affordable home to live in, but we also have an obligation to make sure people are in the best possible place to be able to afford to live in that home, but also to have a quality of life. So I think we have to look at our self-organisation to see how we can do that, around how we can be more efficient. I think sometimes in the sector we are a little bit inefficient, and we have a process for a process for a process. Actually, we probably need to really take a look at our internal structures and actually if they're right, if they're fit for purpose. I think as well, we need to put pressure on the government in a lobbying capacity. And I know it's something that the AHF are doing, and I know the CIH doing as well. So that's why they've done things like the cost of living paper that has been shared, pressure on them to get more support. And I also think we all have to individually take responsibility to help people around us. The one thing the pandemic taught us was that actually as a country, we do have a spirit where we pull together when it's needed. And I think right now, this is a different type of pandemic, but it's most definitely along the same lines. And I think we really need to pull together as a collective to see how we can support one another, because we're going to really need it in the next few years. I agree.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you covered all points there. It's not got to the height yet, has it? It's going to get worse and worse. So unfortunately, I agree, it is the next pandemic. And as we wrap up, a few other things that I did want to talk about is like, where do you see the future of housing going? Because there's a lot of challenges in the sector at the moment. If you think about building safety, the housing crisis from a development perspective, you look at all of the things that we're being asked to do. Never been harder to be a leader, I don't think, in this sector at the moment.
No, I think we're in a perfect storm. So I think we're in a situation where we've had the pandemic, we've now got a cost of living crisis. We've got, I hate being political, I'm now going to get political. We've got a government that perhaps doesn't understand the imperative need for those 300,000 homes a year that they're talking about not keeping to their promise. We have got the building safety bill, which is absolutely the right thing, but it's obviously putting massive pressures on it. At the same time, if we've got to consider carbon neutrality, obviously, net zero. And how do we do all of those things with the same amount of money, and actually in some cases possibly less because of cost of living and inflation like that? So I do think, I think it's a really difficult time to be a leader. I actually don't think it's a difficult time to be a leader. I think it's a difficult time to be anybody. Actually, I think it's a really difficult time to be a frontline housing officer that's got to go out and support people. They are going to see and deal with things that they've never, which I'm not going to see because I'm a little removed from it. But I actually think, to be honest with you, I think their job is going to be far trickier than mine, because they're going to be dealing with real life frontline issues. The same for our trades, trades teams who are going to be thinking, actually, this time last year, plasterboard costed £17 per sheet, is now about up 96 quid, I think, per sheet.
Mental.
Do I really need to use that piece of plasterboard? Shouldn't even be a thought, should it? We should just have to do it because it's what needs to be done to keep that person's home as it needs to be.
Of course.
So I think that's really difficult. I think as a sector, we've got to take a real good look at ourselves. And then I talk about the efficiencies thing again and see we've got to get the basics right. So, unless you've been living under a rock for the last year, you can tell that we haven't got the basics right when you look at damp and mould, amongst many other things, and just actually our tenant service offer.
Yep.
I think we've got to, and we are trying to do this. This is something I talk about an awful lot. It's another one of my little things I get on my soapbox about, is actually we've got to have an equal relationship with our tenants. The days are gone of us being a parent where we tell people what to do. We need to talk to them and ask what's right for them and actually what's right for us as an organisation, and see if we can get to a place where we meet in the middle so everybody benefits.
Yeah.
We need to do that more often. I think we really need to look internally at where we can find efficiencies, and I actually think we really need to look at partnership opportunities, how we can all work together to make things better. Actually, is it right that when you've got competing providers in an area, you're all driving up land prices? No. Why are we doing it? We all want the same thing. We all want to build more homes for people to live in. So why are we competing against another social provider? Why are we not talking to each other and saying, actually, do you know what? We'll take these 300 and you take those 300. That to me seems logical. We're driving up land prices, which isn't helping things like inflation, obviously. So let's have a much more practical look about it. Let's
totally agree with that.
We need to become a little less obsessed with our numbers and actually, to a degree, our egos. And actually put those to one side and do what's right for the sector, not what's right necessarily for just our organisation. It's a much bigger picture, and I think we probably need to get better at breaking down our own silo barriers and work as a collective, because we are an incredibly powerful sector if we work together. And it kind of comes back to, like, when I talk about this, I've spoke about a lot of my VP stuff as well that I've been doing, like the videos and that. We are really, really a powerful group of people because we are in a job which is vocational. Once you get here, you believe in it and you want to deliver what's best for people. So harness it and use it in a positive way. Stop being divisive. We can be a little bit divisive without meaning to, because we're so obsessed with our own organisation swelling its numbers or having the most shiny offer or offering the best tenant experience. Why don't we all just agree to offer a very consistent experience? And actually, why don't we all just do the basics right? Because if we do that, then surely everything else will come afterwards. That would be my kind of, but I think that's difficult. Like, it does require people to put aside personal egos, and that isn't always easy.
Yeah,
I think intentionally, to be honest with you, James, I don't think we intentionally have an ego, but we all have an ego. Of
course we do.
I think that's actually how we learn when to use it and when not to use it. And I don't always think we're very good at that.
No, I agree. And I honestly think that's a really, really powerful way to finish the episode, actually, because I think all of those points are so relevant. And I think the one thing that's shone through in this episode has been around bravery to make decisions, bravery to collaborate, bravery to step outside our comfort zone around equality and diversity and all the things around that topic. But I just think, I'd love to get you back on again in the future, because I think we haven't covered everything I'd love to. But I just wanted to say a massive thank you for coming on. And I wish you really well in your presidency campaign. And I'm sure you're going to smash it.
Thank you. And even if I don't, I'll try again another year, I think. So I'll get there eventually.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, James. Cheers.
See you, bye.